Three, two, one, and we're back. And of course, we're going to be drilling down in the next couple days on what's happening with buyer agency, but also what's happening with commissions in general. So today's podcast is called, well, today's and tomorrow's, is Will You Survive the Great Commission Shift? And Julie has spent a lot of time on this topic. And it's interesting, Julie, I know you wrote this a couple days ago, this outline. Oh, by the way, if you want the outlines to any of our podcasts, and a lot of you do use this information for your social media, maybe you're an office or a broker yourself and you're wanting to have some additional content to share with your agents, well, you can get access to our full notes that we spent a lot of time creating, mostly Julie when I say we. Thank you, Julie.
It's okay.
You just have to go to harrisrealestatedaily.com, and subscribe. That's it. Just stick your email address in that little box and you're off to the races. That is the only place where our full notes are still being published. We used to be able to put them on iTunes and Stitcher and all the other places, but they have edited how much space or limited how much space we can use. So if you want all of our notes, which I know a lot of you do, please do subscribe to our free newsletter. It's called harrisrealestatedaily.com, and you can just go there now and subscribe. All right, Julie, so let's just roll right in.
All right, so here's the big question. How are you handling the commission shift? Now, is commission even shifting, or is it just how you practice real estate that's changed? How are you doing with these changes? Are you hanging in there? Are you freaking out? Are you proceeding with confidence? In light of recent changes, as you all know, to commission sharing policies, which went into effect on August 17th, we've been monitoring the confusion in the marketplace after the first whole weekend of sales activity. So, Tim, I wrote this two-part podcast series largely in reaction and observation to what's really happening in the marketplace. How are agents and brokers digesting and dealing with this? How are they creating best practices, and where's the confusion lie? So we're going to go through several points today and tomorrow, and I am making this very fact-based. I did a lot of research to make sure that we're sticking to what the settlement calls for versus what's maybe happening out there, and our coaching, if you will, on this podcast to simplify your practices, to streamline what you're doing and remove the confusion and speculation.
There are so many headlines out there that are just confusing, misleading. Most of it's coming from social media.
Yeah.
And so Julie just said the bottom line of what we're going to be focusing on to help all of you. We're going to be making it so that it's very simple. So you have a very simple 1, 2, 3 solution to all of these things. But let me tell you guys, and this is really important that you understand, the changes that have been put into place effectively making it so that all buyers have to sign exclusive buyer agency contracts. And within those buyer agency contracts, the buyer is then obligating themselves to pay the buyer's agent's commission. In one form or another, those rules or that standard practice has been around since really the late 90s. And Julie and I have always coached all of our agents, and when we sold real estate, all of our buyer agents to follow that exact procedure. Matter of fact, when Julie and I had a team, now this was back in the 90s and early 2000s. The way we did it with the buyer agents is they would have, they generate the lead, they pre-qualify the lead, then the lead would meet them someplace, usually in our office or, at a Starbucks or whatever. And then they would essentially present to the lead the reason that lead wants to work exclusively with that buyer's agent. Very simple. Those of you who have ever been on a listing presentation, that sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Well, and then, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get ahead of myself. So then what would happen is they'd have to get the state required agency form signed. They'd have to get the exclusive buyer agency form signed, and they'd have to get a buyer net sheet signed. And all three of those forms were required before we were, before we advised our especially buyer agents to work with that buyer. Now, in some cases, the buyer would want to have a look around or look at the paperwork before they signed it. And that's the reason that we always suggested and always mandated with our team that the paperwork arrive in the buyer's, door in the form of a folder prior to the first meeting. And again, that's the same process we've always followed when we're teaching you guys how to be powerful listing agents sending your pre-listing pack. Well, in the buyer world, we had our buyer pack, but we have since revised all of it in light of all these new changes. And we're incredibly excited to announce that starting within, I am hoping, 2 weeks or less, we're going to be rolling out a new designation. And the designation is called Ethical Real Estate Professional. And this designation is going to be your one-stop solution to all things buyer agency. This is phase 1 of this designation. So what you're going to do is we're going to show you exactly how to present your exclusive ethical real estate professional presentation. And that's going to be a folder that's going to offer all your USPs. I'm sorry I don't have a visual to show you quite yet, but I will soon. And when the buyer sees this, they're going to see the value that you give to them beyond just searching for a home in the MLS that they can do on their own, in essence, and opening a door. They're going to want to work with you because of all the added values that they get when working with you. It's very simple to understand this if you've ever listed a house before. The seller wants to know, what are you doing for them beyond what everyone else is doing? Well, this presentation is going to solve that problem for you. And we also include scripts. We're also including all the legal forms, exclusive buyer agency forms. All the things are going to be included in Ethical Real Estate Professional. Now, we have a wait list of 337 agents as of this morning that are wanting to join this program. If you want to join the program, the way we're going to do it, and this is the way we announced we were going to do it a couple weeks ago, is we're going to open the door to only 100 agents. And this is going to be within, like I said, within a couple weeks. And in order to get an invite, you have to put your name on the list. And the way you put your name on the list is very simple. Just text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. And when you do, you're going to go on the list. And so what's going to happen is our staff is going to send out a message saying the program is now open to 100 agents. And the first 100 agents that sign up for the program are the 100 agents that are going to have early access to it. And then probably within 45 or 60 days from then, we're going to open up the door again. Now, why are we doing it that way? Because this is not just a designation. It's not just a product. It's actually a coaching program that's going to be coached by Julie and myself. It's going to include a weekly coaching session, probably an hour, a live coaching session, by the way. So all this is going to be included in the Ethical Real Estate Professional designation. You definitely want to do this because I am here to tell you for sure that things are just going to get more confusing. If you're a broker, if you're a team, if you're an individual agent, this is the solution to the problems that, frankly, are just going to get more intensified over the next probably 6 to 12 months. You will see, when you see what this product is, this is exactly what you've been searching for. Maybe you didn't even know you needed. So text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372 and get on the list.
All right, so all of you are digesting these new changes, and now we have crossed that line in the sand. All of the MLSs. For a while, we had a combination of certain states that had implemented in the beginning of the year. Other places like Canada dealt with this, a year and a half ago. We had states that implemented August 1st, and now we have crossed that line in the sand, the all-important August 17th deadline. So agents are falling into several categories. Again, we've observed, we've been reading what's going on, talking to coaching clients, talking to the coaches, and most of you fall into one of two buckets, right? The educated, motivated, and entirely in action, operating business as usual. I have to say 100% of my private clients that I've spoken with so far today fall into this. Educated, motivated, and in action. Why? Because we were ahead of the curve. They're already using the buyer presentation, etc. Or some of you listening, brokers included, may be confused, needing more direction and leadership, resulting in either inaction or, I've seen a lot of, proceeding incorrectly. This is the case, for example, with agents trying to force open house buyers to sign a buyer agency contract before entering the home. We're going to talk about that in a second. Most agents are somewhere in between confident and confused. We're going to help you fix that today and tomorrow. Most importantly, we will show you how to simplify all of this using some standard, simple practices that will alleviate stress for both you and your buyer clients.
Our goal is to keep this practical and tactical, get you guys into action. But Julie, I'm going to add a possible third group.
Sure.
The agents that are just basically have their heads in the ground and waiting for the storms to pass. And
Sure.
they're going to try to do business the way they always have. And I'm here to suggest that that's going to be a vast majority, right or wrong. You guys decide. A little civil disobedience towards a law or a rule change that you might not agree with. As long as you're willing to deal with the ramifications of that, that's the American way. So there's going to be brokers and teams out there that are just going to essentially try to do business as usual. And, if there's fines associated with it, they're going to live with it. There have been plenty of examples over the years of, rules in real estate that didn't make any sense that people, for ethical reasons started to ignore, and then the rule went away. I don't know if this is one of them or not. And I'll just be honest with you guys from a perspective that might not be in Julie and I's best interest. A lot of the changes that came as a result of this lawsuit, frankly, the industry really truly needed. There was such a lack of formality and a lack of professionalism on the buyer agent side of the transaction that there really were a lot of issues that were arising over the years from consumers not understanding how things worked from the buyer side. Because really, the buyer, as Julie said in our book, Harris Rules, working with buyers is physical labor, working with sellers is mental labor. But now guess what? Working with buyers is both physical and mental labor. You're not just going to generate the lead and then, go out and show the home to somebody and wait for the home to basically, them to walk in the right house and them to want to buy it. The preceding the proceedings of the past with regards to the skill set needed to work with buyers is very rudimentary. They had to like you, you had to like them,
Yeah.
and for the most part, they were going to buy a house provided there was one for sale that they were able to competitively bid on and win. Well, now it's going to be a whole heck of a lot more stuff because you're going to have to show them value, as everyone is used to saying at this point, but you don't know how. That's the reason this ethical real estate professional thing is going to save your bacon. But there will be a lot of people out there, Julie, either by the conscious or the unconscious decision to ignore all these changes and try to proceed as normal. And that's going to happen a lot. There's going to be a lot in this transitional period. There are going to be a lot of buyer's agents out there who I think throw caution to the wind and aren't going to ask buyers or really require buyers to sign exclusives. And that's going to put the agents that are trying to follow the rules at a competitive disadvantage.
Yes.
And I don't know how the industry is going to resolve that, to be honest with you.
I don't either.
And I don't know how the industry is going to police it. I know the MLSs are supposed to be in place to basically go after agents that are not getting exclusive signed, but how are they going to know whether an exclusive was signed or not?
That's right.
The whole,
Well, let's hover there for a second because I think my points coming up here address some of this. For example, who is going to police this? How is that going to go down? Much of the issue, and we're not going to get into arguing about it and speculating because the industry has been doing that for months since this went down. Okay, the fact is there are new practices that we're sorting out with each other, okay? But as I see it, the issue comes in not that the buyer should be committed to the buyer's agent. We all believe that. And I do think that a lot of these changes are good for buyer's agents, good for agents in general because of what you said. It used to be, you're working together, you find a house, we'll put it together. It's relatively easy. Find the house, be competitive. There's some skill involved, but it wasn't a formal relationship. Now, the way I think it's good for buyer's agents is you're going to have instances, and we'll get into how to present, and part of our ethical real estate professional, of course, gets to the heart of that. You will have instances where a buyer either isn't comfortable, maybe they love you, but they're not comfortable committing to that expense, or maybe they just don't want to sign. Maybe they're just sign a form to see a house. And you may have, almost guaranteed, fewer buyers than you think you do, and that's okay. Isn't that a great thing that this is going to sift and sort the less serious? Because now you'll know, if I meet with you today, you do your great presentation, you explain how everything is going to go, you explain how the buyer rep agreement works, what I can expect from you, what you expect from me, what your guarantees are, what your special things about you are, and I'm happy to sign it because I want to buy a house this weekend. That's the buyer you want to work with.
Well, what Julie's getting at is a lot of you, and I think, again, this is going to be a little bit of a purifying experience for a lot of agents and a lot of teams with these big big databases. You're going to quickly realize that many of the people you thought were real buyers aren't real buyers. Here's the way you know if a buyer's a real buyer is if they buy a house. But if they're not willing to sign an exclusive with you, where you're showing them the various ways that you can get paid, it's not going to be necessarily, we don't think even hardly ever will it be an instance where the buyer's going to just basically write the check for the buyer's agency. We think there's a lot of other ways it's going to get paid. But we'll get to that. We talk a lot about that in the Ethical Real Estate Professional Designation Program. But really what you're going to see is there are a lot of these buyers that aren't willing to basically even sign the very rudimentary paperwork. The reason they're not signing it is because they're not serious buyers. Serious buyers are going to are going to want to sign with you because they're serious about finding a house. And if you presented to them the reason why they want to work with you, the reason that, all the benefits, but also the different ways the fee can be paid, they're going to want to sign with you. That's just like when working with sellers. A seller that's not willing to sign a listing contract, an exclusive listing contract, is not a listing. It's not a seller. But so many of you have had zero rules, zero boundaries, zero, guardrails with regards to working with buyers. Now you're going to, because you're going to have to get that buyer to actually say, listen, I'm not a drive around dolly. You're not going to basically be wasting my time. This is essentially what you're saying, whether you think of it this way or not. I am only going to work with the buyers that are willing to commit to me, and these are all the things I'm going to do when you commit to me. These are all the ways I'm going to search for you to find a house. These are all the things I'm going to do above and beyond the average agent. If you're not willing to commit to me and considering the level of service I'm going to provide, that's fine. Move on. Next.
Yes, that's right. Now, let me hover here and clarify. I think there's still a lot of confusion about this. What I have seen online, hearing from coaches, et cetera, is that there is a category of agents who, here's their strategy. They're sending the forms to what they believe to be their buyer client or clients, their 20 buyer people in their pipeline, and they're saying, this is the new law, you need to sign it to work with me. And they're not getting great results from that. If that's what you're doing, sign this because, I'll be in trouble if you don't. That is not a presentation. And I would expect you to have very little response in terms of signatures being sent back. Why? Because you're asking them to commit to something that they don't even know what you're talking about. Versus, okay, so that's a different buyer rejection than somebody who, after the presentation, all of the things that you're going to do, how you're going to find houses, how you competitively negotiate, all of your stats and figures and things that are on their side, and you do a buyer net sheet and you show them the 3 or 4 different ways it can go down. If at that point they do not want to sign with you, well, then you've done your job to educate them, and maybe for whatever reason, they're not ready to work with you. That's different than the first one where they just rejected it because they have no idea what you're even talking about.
Well, every true professional on planet Earth will give you a basic a limited amount of time. Like if you wanted to go hire an attorney, the attorney's going to want you to come in, talk to you, see what your situation is, frankly decide whether he wants to work with you or she wants to work with you and you with them. And then if it's an affirmative, then you're going to be asked to make some kind of, you're going to write a check basically to get that attorney started. Every single professional on planet Earth has a similar process. You don't ever walk into the doctor's office and just basically, have a procedure performed. You have to prove that you can pay. You have to sign all the formage.
Give me your insurance card.
There's not, guys, I want you to think of a single industry other than the way the buyer agent industry in real estate used to work as of a few days ago, no longer works. That worked that way. That was that level, had that level of lack of professional requirements. It doesn't exist. And so what that has caused in a consumer's mind is that's the reason they don't have a lot of respect for agents. That's one of the reasons that our industry has such a reputation issue, is simply because there are so many buyer agents out there that we're not acting in a professional way. Now everyone's going to be forced to. Now, will they? No. I think there'll be, like I was saying, a lot of agents and brokers that just ignore it and throw caution to the wind. Then I think there'll be some that, do some half-assed way, like Julie was just saying. Send the paperwork and sign
hope for
it.
the best.
Do you imagine, Julie, actually doing that with a listing? Like, you find out your neighbor wants to sell and you send them over the
Here you
listing
go.
contract. Here you go.
Yeah, and then being mad that they don't sign it, right?
Right. So the issue that's going to mentally hold a lot of you guys back is your lack of preparedness to feel like you need to be competitive to get that buyer to commit to you. Right? That's going to be the thing that holds a lot of agents back from being listing agents, because they don't know how to answer the questions of, what makes you different? What is your commission? What are you going to do for me? All these things that cause a sense of conflict because you don't know how to answer the question. That's what we teach you in our coaching program. We teach you basically what the questions are going to be, where the threat factors are, and how to move past them with essentially, counseling that potential, we're talking about sellers, but sellers are buyers, through their mental process of wanting to choose you. It's not coercion. It's not manipulation. It's simply acknowledging the fact that they have questions, showing them the various solutions, and counseling them forward, and then ideally they're going to work exclusively with you. That's the thing that's been missing on the buyer side of the transaction for, forever, frankly.
Well, that's right. And I know it seems weird to some of you because it's so different, but to your point, Tim, it is normal for virtually everybody else. As you were talking, I was thinking about, we just replaced the roof on one of our rentals. He didn't just go do the work and hope I was going to pay. I had to sign, and not only did I sign that I was committed to him after getting a couple of estimates, I'm committing, I believe, he's going to do a good job.
Hold on, we have 2 roofs. Are you talking about Texas or Ohio?
I'm talking about Ohio.
Okay.
And it also said, by the way, should it not just be a basic roof repair, but when we tear off this roof, if we find that there's wood that needs to be repaired, it could cost you more. It could go this way or that way. It could go up to 20% more than our estimate. Sign here. That's normal, right? I didn't say to him, well, I'll tell you what, you work on the roof and I'll get back to you and maybe I'll pay you, maybe I don't.
Well, when you go have your car serviced, you have to sign a bunch of paperwork. When you have your oil changed, when you have anything done,
you go to the vet.
Doesn't it just seem ridiculous that it's taking this long?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that what I think is that the buyer side is normalizing. Now, our job, of course, as always, is to educate you, motivate you, and get you into action in this new environment you find yourselves in. We want you all to be in the first category of being confident and going forward so that you can have your best quarter ever, your best year ever. Remember that knowledge equals confidence and ignorance equals fear. And that's why the following 2 podcasts, today and tomorrow, will focus on clarifying and correct practices based on fact, not guesswork. And again, I pulled some of these things out. We'll have them on more than others based on what I'm seeing agents deal with.
I'll read the question, you read the answer.
Sure.
Okay, so these are the big myths that Julie and I have pulled out from various websites a lot of the misinformation that's out there. Remember, our job here is to make it very simple for all of you to understand your very clear path forward. So, Julie, the first question is buyer agency as we know it dead?
All right, so where does this come from? Lots and lots of memes all over the internet right now. Oh, buyer agency is dead. And even people in the news saying, well, now that you don't have to pay a buyer side. Okay, so there's a level of freak out. Buyer agency is dead. That's the myth. Okay, so here's the fact. No, buyer brokers will, of course, all of you will continue to be compensated, though using an MLS to communicate compensation offers will no longer be an option. That's the fact.
Okay, hold on. Let's stop there. Now, the way it is going to work and the way it is going to work for all of you is when you're a listing agent and you need to put in the public-facing comments of your MLS description, which makes it onto Zillow, Trillia, Realtor.com, everywhere, you need to say basically seller will consider all concessions. Something to that extent. Check with your broker, but that's the essence of it. Concessions are they're fine. And so you need to then start considering that a concession, by the way, for those of you who don't know, are anything that basically is beyond the normal realm of an offer. Maybe the concession is the seller's going to leave the piano, or the seller's going to maybe pay part of the buyer's closing costs. Or
it could be anything.
It can be anything, right? Anything above and beyond just the asking price and the closing date and the terms of the contract. Concession, obviously, is also going to be a buyer agent commission. So as a listing agent, just stick in the MLS and the public-facing comments, seller will consider all concessions.
Okay, hover there for a second. Seller will consider all concessions. This is true anyway on any listing since the beginning of listings.
Yep.
Okay, because as Tim said, and I know some of you guys that have only been in hot sellers markets where the seller basically told you what to do, are not familiar with this whole concessions theme. So a concession could be a home warranty. That's a concession. Builders pay concessions for buying down loan rates all the time. A concession could be money towards a down payment. A concession could be a decorating allotment to take out the shag carpet from 1973. It could be a buyer side commission. Concessions are the big bucket of things that are negotiable, which a listing agent, pay attention to the listing agents, will then put into the hopper and create a net sheet for the seller based on all of those things. What is the price that they're willing to pay minus the concessions equals the seller's net.
Now, hold on, Julie. Let me break in there. So we also want to clarify with regards to how financing works. So if you are going, first of all, we think there's going to be various ways that the buyer agent commissions are still going to get paid. We think for the most part, sellers are going to still want to pay it because it's going to benefit them. Julie's going to get into that. And just from a statistical perspective, based on sales, we're going to be able to probably over the next 6 to 12 months show the seller there's actually a competitive advantage to them giving a commission or through the form of a concession to the buyer's agents. We believe that's how it's actually going to work. And as the market starts to shift more to a balanced market, let alone a buyer's market, I think you'll see that even more. But really what you're going to ultimately think is, say, for example, you have a seller that's for whatever reason just dug in, or the nature of the net to the seller, that all the offers makes it so that your offer that's asking for a concession in the form of a buyer agent commission makes your buyer's offer less competitive. Well, then you're going to want to talk with the buyer about plan B, which is going to be financing the actual commission. And the way it's going to work is as long as there's 6% concessions, I think is actually what it's called, on the finance side. We're going to get more into this in a little bit later, but the gist of it is, as long as, say, for example, the house is $500,000, and let's say the buyer agent concession is, let's say, $15,000. As long as the house is going to appraise for $515,000, if it's a government-backed loan, the loan will still go through. It has to appraise, obviously, and thank you for those of you who clarified that, because I didn't say that correctly about 2 weeks ago. But yes, the gist of it is as long as it appraises, that's going to become a concession of the transaction, and the commission to the buyer agent, which is technically the buyer's obligation. It's an expense that they have to pay to the buyer agent. The seller is just paying the buyer agent commission as part of a concession to the transaction, and the buyer is essentially financing their buyer agent commission. That's the way it's going to most likely work if the seller's not willing to pay it right out of the gates. And you're also going to see hybrid approaches. You'll see maybe the seller's willing to include a little bit of the concession of the buyer agent commission, and the rest of the buyer agent commissions have to be paid through, like I just said, the financing aspect of it. These are all things that we're going to work through together. This is the way business has always been done.
It's called negotiating.
It's called negotiating. I mean, Julie and I have been in this, industry for a generation. A generation is defined, I just learned yesterday, by the way, by Peter Thiel, 30 years. Okay. So 30 years is considered a generation. I've actually never known that. When
I
someone
guess
says,
I never put a year
Right.
allotment to it, but that makes sense.
when someone says a generation, is it 10 years?
Well,
Is it
no, that
100
makes
years?
sense because most people have kids in their 30s, so that's
Yeah.
the next generation, right?
I guess that makes sense. But anyway, so he said 30 years. So Julie and I have been in this industry for a generation. Dum, dum, dum.
Scary.
And this is the way business has always been done. But a lot of you, I would say almost all of you, have never sold real estate in a market that's anything other than a hot seller's market, or never sold real estate in a market or in an industry where it wasn't very common for buyer leads to be essentially sold to buyer's agents. And in an industry where the buyer's agent commission has always been an entitlement to the transaction, you just automatically got it. Those are in essence, those are the things that are going to change. You learn to work within those previous guidelines, those guardrails. Now you just got to learn to work within the new ones.
That's right. So remember that compensation methods include fixed fee commission paid directly by consumers, concessions, as we just discussed, from the seller. Listing agents, make sure you show them a net sheet. Another option is a portion of the listing broker's compensation. Remember, when you're having these discussions, listeners, we're talking about negotiating. Compensation will remain negotiable, has always been negotiable, and should be negotiated between agents and the consumers they represent.
And by the way, a very good argument could be made that buyer's agents' commissions have always been, essentially a cost to the buyer and was factored into the actual selling price of the house. In essence, I think that argument could be, frankly, very well effectively made.
Yep.
And that's probably, now it's just, the difference is then it was kind of opaque, right?
Right. You just never thought of it this way.
Right. Now you're going to see it's going to be out in the open. So just be comfortable having those conversations and you'll be fine. Julie, question number 2. Are we on for question 2?
Yes.
All right. Reliance on offers of compensation pre-policy change. Can we clarify that,
Yes.
please?
Okay. So this is a logistical thing, and that means that existing contracts, some of you guys went into contract before August 17th and now are in contract after August 17th with the closing coming up. If a sales contract is executed before the MLS policy change, the buyer broker can rely on the offer of compensation even if the closing occurs after the policy change. So you don't have to rewrite things, guys. There's been a lot of chatter about that.
Right, and you don't have to go back and have exclusives signed for the buyers that you already have in contract, so don't worry about that. All right, Julie, now this is where it gets a little weedy, but I think we just frankly talked about this a lot, but it's a good topic to quickly revisit. MLS compensation information. Let's hear about that, Mrs. Harris.
Okay, here's the prohibition. The new MLS policies prohibit any information about compensation on an MLS. Notice that word is different than concession. You cannot have any information about compensation on the MLS.
Okay, let's drill down. In there also, don't do workarounds, don't do any shady shit. By the way, some of the shady shit that agents are doing, I mean, seriously.
It's kind of funny.
There was an article on Inman, I don't know if you guys read Inman, but where agents, I don't know if it's true or not, but it's funny if it's not, where agents have actually taken pictures of the outside of properties for sale, and the seller mowed into the grass like 3% or whatever. I mean, there's things just like there's agents that were taking pictures, and they put a picture, a whole pretty house, and then there would be a family with like 3 kids in the picture, those types of things. Guys,
a birthday cake with a candle that had the number on it.
Exactly. So that is, I think you spend less time trying to be creative and more time just to learn how to work within the new rules and the guidelines. But those may have just been memes,
Yes.
Creative ones nonetheless.
Yeah.
But the reality of it is that don't look for or figure out a workaround. Just deal with the rules. The rules are, and we just told you, in the public-facing comments that everyone's going to see, sellers will consider all concessions. That's it. Now, how are you going to find out what the concessions are? You want to know if they're going to pay for a home warranty. You're going to want to know if they're going to help pay for that new roof. You're going to want to know if they're willing to take a VA loan, whatever, right? You call the listing agent like you always have done. So call the listing agent and ask what the concessions are, and the listing agent will tell you. But here's what they're going to say, because they're representing the seller. The seller is going to consider all concessions. And if you as a buyer's agent say, well, what types of concessions will the seller consider? A good listing agent is going to say, we are going to gather offers, and whichever offers make the most sense to benefit the best interest of my seller, those are the offers they're going to take. That's basically it. That's the way business has always been done.
That's no different than when you would call the listing agent. We've been starved for inventory for so long. You guys are used to calling listing agents. And you would say, what's the price that your seller is looking for? And that listing agent would say, write up your highest and best, and we're going to put them all in the hopper. We're going to do net sheets, and whoever is highest and best wins, or we're going to counter everybody at the same time. This is just another layer of negotiating.
Jules, think about this. How many years ago was it that in many markets, homes were selling for substantially over list price?
Yeah, there's still markets where that's happening. Yes.
Right. I mean, and so you guys,
It's the same conversation for different reasons.
exactly. That's all it is.
That's it, right? I mean, let's say you've got an otherwise perfect house and the buyer, finds something wrong with, back to the roof, right? It needs a new roof. Well, okay, so I'm going to compare a buyer who is asking the seller to repair the roof or give a concession for that versus one that's not. Make your decision based on what the purchase price is and the rest of the terms, the closing date, the possession, all of the things,
You're
right?
going to have to learn how to write really competitive offers. You're going to have to be essentially build a reputation, frankly, of being someone that the listing agents are going to want to work with because you write clean offers. You're going to, again, I just go back to all the, billions of homes that you and I sold. And when you and I are listing agents and we get offers on some agents, and we knew from having worked with those agents before that they didn't pre-qualify their buyers, they didn't have their buyers pre-approved, they were real, hard to work with throughout the transaction, and then we would get maybe another offer or two other offers where the net to the seller was the same, but the offers came in from agents that were very good at pre-qualifying, always had
Sent
clean
their lender's
offers,
letter in.
didn't try to over-negotiate on inspections, all these things. They were easy to work with, did a great job representing their buyers, were just a great process throughout the whole transaction. Okay, as a listing agent, you're going to then present to your seller, okay, here's the situation with this one, and this one. The seller is going to ask you, well, which one would you take? And then you're going to give them the explanation as far as which one's in their best interest. Here's where it gets weedy. Sometimes you're going to have to work through the fact that sometimes to a seller, the most important thing is not the net. Sometimes to the seller, I'll say almost all times to the seller, it's the hassle. So if you can give the seller, again, you're going to have to learn how to write more competitive offers, but maybe the seller wants more time after the home closes. Depending on what time of loan the buyer has, they might be able to do a lease back. Maybe they want to have, maybe every other offer that came in is asking for, the kids' play stuff in the backyard, but the seller doesn't want to include it. But you've called the listing agent ahead of time, and you know that from the listing agent that seller wants to keep the play set for sentimental reasons.
Because you asked using the script that we teach in coaching, what's most important to your seller.
Right.
Okay?
And these are all things you're going to learn in ethical real estate professional. But this is when we say you're going to have to learn to be more competitive. For many of you, you're just going to have to learn to be professional or more professional. I'm not trying to be snotty or condescending. I'm just hoping you open your mind to the fact the greatest fortunes have always been made during the greatest times of change. And we're in one of those greatest times of change now. Don't resist. Don't look for shortcuts. Don't look for easy exits. Look for a way to simply work within the new rules and make it so that you're always operating under the best interest of in the case of today's podcast, your buyers.
All right, one more point, and then we will continue this tomorrow, okay? So, number 4, MLS listings and broker contact information. I thought this was interesting, and all of these points and clarifications I took straight off of the NAR FAQs and Q&As, and this has all been well researched. This is not us speculating. MLS listings and broker contact information, permitted, allowed. MLSs may provide links to a listing broker's contact information, such as telephone numbers or preferred communication methods. Not allowed, prohibitions. These links, and this is verbatim off of NAR, okay? These links cannot be used to circumvent the prohibition on making offers of compensation on an MLS or disclosing broker compensation. That is not allowed, even using links. This means that you could be in violation if you link to a voicemail, text, or website that states compensation, which I know some of you listening have already set up.
We just learned this like 3 days ago, so this is fresh off the presses. By the way, none of this stuff has been legally tested yet, but I'd rather have it not tested on you, dear listener. So again, this is the reason that we are not wanting you to look for any shortcuts, and the world's going to be full of shortcuts for the next 6 to 12 months until some of this gets worked out legally. Don't be the person that basically is the trial balloon for some of these different things. Follow our rules. We told you we're going to keep it simple. A seller will consider all concessions. Call me, the listing agent, for more specific information. That is all allowed to be there. Listing agents, don't be lazy. Answer the damn phone and have conversations with buyers. Those buyers might, the next day represent a listing that one of your buyers wants to buy. So keep that in mind.
Yes, that's right. So remember, at the top of this podcast, we promised to help you make your best practices simple and also compliant. All right. So using this point, you cannot have a link that takes somebody to your website or what have you, or a PDF somewhere that says for 123 Elm Street, we're paying this, and 567 Cherry Street, we're paying that. You cannot do that. Your best, most simple practice is to simply say, sellers of my listings will consider, that doesn't guarantee anything, will consider concessions, because that puts everything into one big negotiation. And then here's where you send the offer. That's it. Don't get into the weeds. Don't do different things for different listings. Just be very clear. Sellers would consider all concessions. That, again, that goes to everything that could go into a negotiation. You're keeping it super clean. You're not getting into a back and forth conversations. You're not making different rules for different people. We are just simply saying, here's where you send the contract.
And the gist behind this, the legal, I think, and again, I'm trying to keep my opinion to myself on this, but the idea was that agents are steering their buyers towards listings that paid more in commission.
That's what we're trying to, that is the essence of what the settlement is trying to prevent.
Right. Now, do I think that actually happened? No, I do not. Okay? I just don't. I don't think that's even reasonable, because at the end of the day, the buyers had full access to all the information that was out there. And what? There's going to be a house, the buyer's trying to choose, wants to see 5 houses. And because 2 of them pay less than whatever you think the market rate commission is, you're not going to show those houses to those buyers. Those buyers aren't going to put up with that. They're going to go directly to the listing agent. Of course, they're still going to want to see those listings. That's just the way it works. So the idea that agents were steering their buyers towards listings that paid more commission, I would love to see the statistical proof of that, not just the theoretical proof of it. I'd love to see actual facts that pertained, and maybe it's out there, and we'll do a podcast on it, but I don't think that actually happened.
That said, and I agree with you, I'm sure that there are isolated instances. However, the changes to practices have caused some agents, because I see agents mostly on social media posting this, well, I'm only going to show this, I'm only going to show that. Don't do that. Don't do that. That is basically the definition of steering.
Yep.
Your job is to do what is best for your client, period. If house A meets their criteria and house B meets their criteria, show both houses.
Well, not beyond that, Julie, or in addition to that, the idea that you're going to be relevant in real estate by essentially, even if, let's just say, steering is actually happening in a grand scale and I've got my head in the sand, you're not going to be competitive in the business very long, because very quickly the market's going to figure out that you're not looking out for the best interest of your buyers in this case, and they're not going to want to work with you. Word's going to get out. So it just, all these things, ultimately, all they're doing is they're trying to make it so that all buyers agents have to get their skills on. Yes. They have to learn how to pre-qualify. They have to learn how to present. They're going to have to learn how to, essentially show the value to the prospective buyer, just like listing agents always have, just like every single professional always have. Don't be afraid of this, and absolutely don't procrastinate learning how to do this, because it gives you a competitive advantage. While the rest of the marketplace is looking for shortcuts, workarounds, and all this wiggle room, don't do that. Become a professional. Do consider becoming a member of Ethical Real Estate Professional. Text the word buyer to 47372 and we'll put you on the list. This is going to be a product that I think will really change the industry, because it's getting at the heart of what it's going to take for all of you to feel comfortable and confident representing buyers. We're running this by attorneys. We're running this by different brokers. We're making sure this is a state-of-the-art thing that's turnkey for everyone. And so far, so good. So please do consider putting your name on the list to become a member of the Ethical Real Estate Professional. Text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372, and we'll put you on the list. And then I think hopefully within 2 weeks or less, we'll send out a text to all of you and letting you know that you can join the program. And the first 100 agents that join will be the first 100 agents in the program. So don't wait on that. Text the word buyer, B-U-Y-E-R, to 47372. In the meantime, keep listening to this podcast. I know our downloads and our listens and our views on YouTube have gone through the roof, because Julie and I are cutting through the BS that's essentially everywhere in the industry about this. And we're really focusing on educating you, motivating you, and getting you guys into action using the right information. And hopefully you did that on today's podcast. Have a fantastic day. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.